Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to this webinar organized by the English Corner and Instituto Superior Juan XXIII English Department. Today, our guest is Clare Henderson from Bell School, Cambridge, England. We are really happy with your presence, Clare. You know that we are celebrating our 60th anniversary. Our department is
Right.
celebrating
Yes,
its
right.
birthday. And so it's a great present for us. Yes, your presence here, as well as the presence of so many teachers and students from all over the world. We have people from Albania, Spain, Colombia, Cameroon, Morocco, Mexico, Peru, Senegal, Lebanon, Poland, and Panama. Thanks a lot for joining us. Welcome you all.
Clare Henderson has a master's in applied linguistics, has been an EFL teacher since 1988 and a teacher trainer since 1996. She has given teacher development seminars and workshops in Germany, Austria, Luxembourg, and Argentina since 1994, has worked for Bell Educational Services in Cambridge, where she teaches general English, Cambridge exam classes, and specialist professional courses. She has been writing and delivering a contemporary English course for Bell's Teacher Academy since 2009. Clare is a seminar writer for Cambridge Assessment English and an item writer for Cambridge University Press. Her interests are reading, tennis, and work. Welcome, Clare. I invite
Thank you.
everyone to mute your microphones and leave your questions at the chat. They will be forwarded to Clare at the end. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Yes, as you heard, I've been in the business of English language teaching for quite some years. I still really enjoy it, but my passion, I suppose, my passion is words and reading. So I hope to transmit some of that that passion to you in today's webinar, and I'm going to attempt now to share my PowerPoint with you. So fingers crossed, here we go. I'll just enlarge if possible, and then let's do a little check that it's visible. Yeah?
We can see it, yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's fine. I got a thumbs up here on my my phone at the side. Okay. Well, what is contemporary English exactly? So I was thinking about this as I wrote that title. It's not exactly the most groundbreaking of titles, but I thought, where shall I put the position of that exactly? I could stick it at the end there. That's fine. That's quite conversational. Or I could maybe bring it to the initial position. What exactly is contemporary English? It doesn't matter with this word exactly. You know, it doesn't change the meaning. So let's just move on to a little bit of greeting. Well, greetings from Cambridge, where you can see the wonderful Bridge of Sighs on the left over the River Cam. People will be out there today punting because it's a wonderful 22 degrees here, which, if you know England, is positively tropical. And on the right is the Bell School, where I work and where I have been based for some years, many years. I did my initial teacher training certificate, my CELTA, in that very building in 1987, and I've been involved with English as a foreign language ever since that date. Okay, well, we need to just do a little check here. This apparently was the quote of lockdown 2020, and there was seemingly a massive 500% increase in the word unmute, unmute your mics, as people were working from home or teaching from home and having to say this to their students and participants, you're on mute, please unmute. So a huge explosion in the word unmute, reflecting an enormous change in people's working lives. So I think we better just check here and now. Can you all hear me? And thumbs up, please. Yes, or nodding. That's fine. Thanks very much. Great. Okay. So a little bit of the outline, what I want to do with you today in this webinar about what exactly is contemporary English. I want to give you a little bit of background as to how I have come to be, sort of synonymous in Bell with contemporary English. What's my relationship to contemporary English? How did this come about? And I want to start off by taking a look at some more recent lexical additions to the English language, especially items that have been, prominent in online dictionaries, especially. I want to then move on to looking at 5 core themes that I think we can't avoid talking about under the umbrella term of contemporary English. We are teachers. I would like to think a little bit about implications for teaching towards the end of the webinar. There's so much new language coming about. What do we, is it our responsibility to introduce it to students? And then lots of teachers on teacher development courses ask me, how can I go home and keep my own English up to date? So I have some recommendations for you at the end of the webinar. These are sites or people to follow on Twitter maybe that I always say are worth looking out for and keeping up to date with. Okay, so, well, if I began this talk with these lines, good day to one and all. Absolutely marvelous to have you here. We shall have a splendid time. If I began this webinar with those lines, I think a lot of you'd be thinking, hang on a minute, I'm in the wrong webinar here because this is not contemporary English. And, you would be absolutely right. Nobody speaks like this nowadays. This is not contemporary anymore. But how do we know this? How do we, teachers or materials writers or exam writers, how do we know what's hot and what's not any longer? Well, we know this stuff thanks to sites like, hang on a minute, yeah, we know we can keep up to date thanks to sites like these two, the Language Observatory Group. It's a Facebook page. If you know the material, the English Vocabulary and Use, Mike McCarthy, he's a big name in vocabulary writing, but you can log in there and you can become a member and you can just post observations about changes in language. And of course, the biggest influencer perhaps, where we get a lot of information about spoken language, and changes in spoken grammar, is of course the spoken BNC. This is the 1990s corpus and then the 2010s corpus, so two with a distance between them, 11.5 million words of transcribed casual conversation. And you can just log on there. You don't have to register or anything. It's available as a platform for anyone to access. But of course, this is where we can actually find data on how language is changing. And if I just go back to my previous slide, well, if I'd opened with something like the word marvelous or splendid, things like the spoken British National Corpus, we know from corpus linguistics, corpus analysis, that words like awesome and amazing and cool are replacing and have been replacing for some time now somewhat dated adjectives like splendid, smashing, and marvelous. Okay, so people like lexicographers have to be very careful when they're writing dictionary entries, especially online dictionary entries, that they are not using examples of language that is antiquated or not reflective of the society that we live in today. So a little bit about how I got involved with contemporary English and what is contemporary English and my relationship to it. Well, I think in answer to the first, what is contemporary English exactly? You know, the natural tendency is probably for people to say, oh, it's just a whole lot of new words and phrases. And to a large extent, it is. We can't ignore that, the speed at which we get new vocabulary into English. And the joy of English is that nobody says we can't have all this new vocabulary. You know, we've got no regulatory body. There's no language academy that says, oh, you can't invent that, or you can't blend these two items together. It's very creative, it's very playful, as you know, and we're not regulated in any way. But there are other aspects above the lexical to consider, and this is what we are going to be investigating in this webinar. So on a personal level, as was mentioned in the introduction, I first became involved in running a contemporary English language course for Bell, I think back in 2009, when Bell planned to launch a brand new course for the teacher development summer campus. And they approached me. Lucky old me, many years later, I'm still saying that. And they said to me, now, could you write enough material on contemporary English to run a 2-week course? So 30 hours worth of material on contemporary English. And this was really throwing me in at the deep end. I didn't know where to start. So I had to begin looking for myself, you know, in my daily reading of newspapers and magazines at home and listening to things on the news and on TV. I had to begin looking at what words and phrases were new, were modern, were up to date, what grammar was being discussed, you know, on Radio 4. People always complain about it, or in the staff room. I had to keep my eyes and ears open. And I had to consult vocabulary books that were already published to see if they had a chapter or a section on new words in English and anything that was relevant or could be implemented. I had to teach myself about clippings, you know, shortened words, about blended words or blendings. I had to learn the difference between abbreviation and acronym. And I had to think a lot more at a much deeper level about the language that was all around me in my daily life. You know, the various ways in which English changes and creates words. So gradually I built up a bank of material, but of course, by its nature, this course has to change with the times. And so I have to constantly keep my eyes and ears open to monitor current and ongoing changes to vocabulary, but also to grammar, to a much lesser extent, but to grammar. Grammar does change and has been changing. And also phonology, because let's not forget, you know, probably the biggest change in English language teaching that I've seen in 30 years of teaching is the way that we view and teach pronunciation in the English language classroom. Okay, all right, so awesome, splendid, not anymore. Okay, all right, so sorry, I've missed out a slide here, I think. Sorry to be darting around here. All right, so be prepared then, I think, is the motto of the Scouting movement. And David Crystal says this could equally well be the motto of the English language learner. We never know what change is going to be encountered as time goes by. So we know, of course, that vocabulary changes very, very quickly. A new word can become widespread currency within a matter of days, thanks to the global reach of the internet. Grammar change, by its nature, is much, much slower. Okay, but we do know that vocabulary changes extremely rapidly. So I'm aiming today then to give you the general idea of what constitutes contemporary English, picking up some core themes, We're going to start off with some more recent lexical additions, especially to online dictionaries. So there'll be some vocabulary items for you to take away and research further, or perhaps just use. Okay, so if you are putting stuff in the chat, I've made it a little chat box task. What's special about these? Let's start by taking a look at some vocabulary items. Let's think about meaning, or what is perhaps significant about these. You can pop your suggestions in the chat if you want to engage with these a little bit. Okay, I'm going to monitor the chat to see if anybody's typing anything in. All right, well, I'm sure you realize and you recognize quite a few. A couple of these items have at some point been chosen as words of the year, WOTY, words of the year. Most notably, it's Oxford Dictionary that chooses a word of the year in about September, usually. But also, you know, the other big publishing dictionaries like Collins and Cambridge, Macmillan, they also choose a word of the year. Sometimes they're the same. Sometimes they have different winners, let's say. The annual winner, the number one choice, then is a word that is deemed to reflect the ethos, the mood, or the preoccupations of that particular year. And it's also an item that is predicted by the lexicographers to have lasting potential as a word of cultural significance. So here we've got some examples of items which have all come to prominence in contemporary British society. A great many of them, not surprisingly, are rather socio-political, or words that have come into the public consciousness from ecology and green issues. There's a climate emergency there, for example, maybe arising from a concern about identity and inclusion. Equality and race, you know, these are things that people are talking about very, very widely and extensively nowadays. And our Lexis reflects that. I notice now, and maybe it's something that's going on in other countries as well, I notice now on television programs, when contestants on, for example, a makeover show are being interviewed one-on-one, what you see at the bottom of the screen is their name, their age, their occupation, and now increasingly the pronouns that they use. So for example, you know, Joshua, 18, student, he/him, or Jack, 25, nurse, they/them. Okay. And the word Brexit itself has been very, very generous in gifting new items to the English language since 2016. Here we've got a riff of Brexit. We've got Megxit, Meghan Markle's exit from the royal family. And people talked about Grexit, you know, Greece's exit from the EU and so on. So we've got quite a spread here, from selfie, which was word of the year in 2013, to climate emergency, word of the year in 2019. But what about last year, 2020? Well, Oxford Dictionary was unable to choose one single word to represent last year because so many lexical items came out of the COVID pandemic. And Oxford, in fact, published a 38-page report on words, plural, words of the year. And it's really fascinating reading. You can download it for free from the Oxford Dictionary's website. So let's give you a tiny, let's isolate 3 of these items. Let's give you a tiny on-the-spot test if you want to type in the chat. What are these? What do you think these 3 things are? We have cakeism, a slanket, and a quarantini. So I'm not sure if anybody's using the chat to pop items up. Let me have a look. Okay. All right. Okay. You had a chance to consider. Well, let's take this first one, cakeism. So this is an example of something. It may be a word that is rather new for some of you. You know that we love our food-related metaphors here in the UK. And this is an item that has been with us since 2016. So that's a big clue. Since 2016, we have started accusing each other of cakeism. You know, that was the year we held the referendum that resulted in Brexit. And another clue for you, this is a lexical item that arose from the saying, you can't have your cake and eat it too. Okay, so maybe you've come up with the idea of what cakeism is, and it is then wanting to enjoy all the benefits of one situation, but at the same time not accepting any of the disadvantages that go with it. For example, really wanting to have children, but not being prepared to have sleepless nights. So in the early days of Brexit, the Labour Party was accused of wanting to pick and choose which European institutions the UK would continue to remain a member of post-Brexit. Okay, so it's an uncountable noun, and the belief that you can have all the benefits of a particular situation, but none of its disadvantages. Okay, and you'd have a cakeist attitude. All right, so being picky and choosy. All right, so maybe you wanted to find out a bit more about the slanket and the quarantini. These are a couple of Corona coinages, lockdown lexis. So there are a lot of things written about the language of COVID and the language of the pandemic, and how playful and creative it was for the English language in particular. Okay, so I'll show you then these newer additions arising from people's need during lockdown to make themselves comfortable or to indulge themselves, give themselves a little treat. And here we have two very recent blends or blendings, blend words. So you've got the blanket with sleeves, the slanket. It's a kind of fleece travel blanket with sleeves. These two are clearly enjoying their slanket on a flight, although God help them when they have to get up and rush to the emergency exits, because I'm sure you can't walk in these things. They look like they've escaped from a monastery. But okay, that's the slanket, and it's a recent blend word. And then the quarantini, maybe people have had a good interpretation of this. It's a blend again. It's martini. It's a regular martini. You drink it at cocktail hour, but you drink it alone in isolation in your own home, of course. Okay, so as we said then, some newer additions to the English language spawned in the pandemic era. Okay. All right, so let's move on then. I don't mean here, I've asked you what are these, and I don't mean what do they mean, but rather what do they have in common, okay, as a linguistic feature. All right, so some of the most prominent innovations in the current state of English are these three. What did you say they were? If you've typed or if you've just thought to yourself, well, these are affixes. Okay, you're absolutely right. So we are seeing more and more items like crowdsourcing, crowd sharing, crowd lending, and the common suffix less as in the cashless society. Now, the one that's proliferated, of course, in all the shops throughout lockdown is contactless payment. You know, you're being asked to just tap your card onto the reader, no handling of cash, of course. So contactless payment. More and more people are working from the paperless office, environmental concerns again. The driverless car is with us, or it's coming. And of course, then free. You can think of carbon free, lots of other examples, lactose free, meat free, and others that you can think of. So there's a nice one nowadays that you may have come across. If you are getting married and you don't want children to spoil your big day, you can issue to your friends and family child-free wedding invitations, or rather an invitation to a child-free wedding. In other words, please come without your kids and don't disrupt our magical day. Okay, so we are seeing then a little selection of what we would label more contemporary affixes. And going back to what we said before with Lexis, they're all very much relevant to how we feel about society and what our preoccupations and what our mood is as we exist now in the early 21st centuries. Okay, moving on then to looking at some idioms, some idiomatic expressions. You can maybe work this one out. I've circled it in red. Going full Harry Potter. So this was an Americanism, and I noticed it some months ago on a Twitter post. Younger Americans are getting COVID-19. So, should schools shut down? Schools are not inherently safe, but they can be made safer by classes going full Harry Potter. So I had to look at this and I thought, goodness me, is this a new idiom that's cropped up here? And it means, as you can probably work out, it's nothing to do with invisibility cloaks or wands or whatever. It means keeping students in defined and presumably small social cohorts or groups. And I imagine what they're alluding to with this one is the friendship trio, that very tight-knit trio of Harry and Ron and Hermione. Okay, so this was, not letting students in American schools mingle in large groups, but just trying to prevent the spread of COVID by going full Harry Potter in small friendship groups. Okay, well, on the right-hand side then, we have some new, let's say newer, because admittedly they're from 2010, some newer British idioms. And I'm sure lots of these will be very familiar to you. To say that the first lady of whatever, the analogy with the first lady of the president of the United States' wife, meaning the best or the expert, the best in their field. If you've fallen off the radar, you have been forgotten. Nurses, there's been lots of this in the news during lockdown, of course. People, neighbors, nurses going the extra mile for each other, the patients, and so on, doing more than strictly necessary or making a big effort, going the extra mile for whoever, and being fed up with someone big time. So just that kind of intensifier, meaning, I'm extremely fed up with him. Now, these are featured in the latest edition of English Idioms in Use. I mentioned Mike McCarthy before as one of the founders of the language interest group that monitor language change. And we know, of course, that new idioms evolve from television, from advertising, from politics, business, and very extensively from popular culture. they quickly become expressions that are widely understood and used by many people in their everyday lives. But, you know, it's always impossible, as with all words and phrases, some of them will be popular, will endure for a few years and then be forgotten, whereas others may well stand the test of time. We just don't know, and it's a question of monitoring what's going on via a corpus, for example. Okay. All right. So let's do a little bit of a summary before we move on to the next section when we look at some core themes in more detail. If we summarize what we can say about lexis or vocabulary, lexical items, it's no surprise that we have such a proliferation of new words and phrases coming into English. And as I said before, you know, there's no curb. There's no language academy saying you can't have that, or you can't say that, or you can't do that. So we're very free and easy in a way with the language that we accept and tolerate and embrace, in fact, especially on a lexical level. And these are all the different walks of life from which we get new items of vocabulary. Okay. And David Crystal, who is somebody that, you know, whose work and whose musings I have been following for years and years, he is probably the #1 authority on the English language living today. As Crystal says, you know, new language is invariably influenced by the culture around it. It doesn't exist in a vacuum. As we've seen with the vocabulary items that were words of the year. If there's a gap to be filled in the lexicon, we will fill it. And nobody says that we can't do this. That is the joy of English. Okay. All right. So let's move on to have a look at some of the core ideas that I wanted to look at 5 sort of core ideas that for me embody what contemporary English has to be about. So I think the big message is we can't just relegate or limit contemporary English to talking about lexis on its own. Although having said that, you know, number 5 is the repurposing of a vocabulary item. But what we are seeing here then are new constructions and varieties of English. And you know probably that David Crystal has been talking about Englishes, you know, plural Englishes for quite a long time. So as features of contemporary English, we should include youth language, number 3, and non-standard forms of grammar, number 4. So let's take a look at each item in turn. Okay. All right. So here we go. Netflixing and chilling. All right. So what about you then? Do you pod? This is an Ariel advert from 2019. Are you a podder? Or do you favor washing powder or liquid? All right. At the weekends, do you Netflix and chill? One increasing trend that we are seeing is that of denominalization. Now that's a mouthful. That means getting rid of nouns to turn them into verbs. It's also called verbing or verbification. It's darn sight easier than denominalization. Okay. Now, this is not a new process. It's been around a very long time. Shakespeare was an early verbifier. You know, he was such a creator of language and very playful. So it's been around for ages. It's been adopted as it makes things snappier, fresher, shorter, more dynamic, more memorable. I mean, if you take the example of bin something, you know, when you've finished with something, you want to throw it away, you can put it in the bin, that's 5 words, or you can simply bin it. you can telegraph it down to 2 words. Let's bin it. Okay. And of course, brand names have always been a very rich source of verbing. You can think of hundreds of others, hoovering, Googling, eBaying, Instagramming, Ubering, Snapchatting. There is a multitude of these verbs based on brands, as you well know. Do you remember lol? It began life as an initialization for some people, LOL, or an acronym, LOL, for some, and then it became a verb in its own right. We were lolling our heads off. He who lols last lols loudest, and so on. So that one has got a very interesting sort of history or life of its own as a linguistic feature, the life of lol or LOL. And just last month, or early May, I was scrolling through Twitter, as I do on a daily basis, and I noticed that the Oxford English Dictionary word of the day on the 6th of May was adult, to adult, so the verb, behaving like an adult. Now, admittedly, this has been around. I've seen this and heard this for some years, if not exactly in widespread use, but it has been around for a while. So if you're paying your bills and paying your mortgage and you're looking after your parents and your kids, you're adulting like a boss. Okay. Now, why did this telegraphic style come about? Well, the likely response is because of text messaging and the need to be brief, that sort of economy of style. You used to have to write your tweets in 140 characters, if you recall. So there was a lot of abbreviating and emoticon using going on then. But as I said, Shakespeare was an early verbifier, and easy conversion of nouns to verbs is something that makes English English. So said the renowned linguist Steven Pinker, and that was back in 1964. So we know it's been around for a long time, and it looks likely to stay with us, to be staying with us. Here are some more humorous ones. This is something I saw in the Cambridge newspaper a few years back. They proclaimed that June is over. We're Julying now. Not quite, but we'll be Julying next month. You're going to sex things up, make it more appealing or make it more attractive. After your bicycle ride through the countryside, you're heading for the pub and you just shout, "Beer me," immediately. And I'm gasping, "Beer me," or whatever your drink of choice. And here's that interesting one, the heart symbol now converted into a verb in its own right, but just existed originally on a t-shirt, "I heart New York," but now read as a verb in its own right. So verbing has been around a long time, and it seems very, very likely to stay with us. It's so playful and so creative. Okay. All right. So second aspect then to move on to. This morning, did you spread the happy on your toast this morning? I know that my 17-year-old, not that he gets up for breakfast anymore, but he likes to spread the happy pretty much every day. This is another linguistic tendency, of course, and it's of interest to dictionary compilers, lexicographers, and linguists in general. The sudden increase in the use of adjectives as nouns. And as with verbing, yes, this is kind of memorable, beloved of advertisers, as I mentioned. Some other things that you may have come across, find your fabulous for clothing manufacturer or designer. Find your happy. This is a recent slogan of a chain of British estate agents, find your happy. So the most recent example, which has exploded during the COVID pandemic, is this one, the new normal. We need to get used to the new normal, where, of course, we had always been used to seeing the word normal as an adjective. And so this is a clear example of usage flying in the face of long-established grammar convention, which states that the definite article is followed by a noun. Love it or hate it, it seems very likely to be here to stay, especially in advertising. Okay, so this is another little feature of things, something that has been designated very contemporary use of language and flouting grammar convention. Okay. All right, let's move on, shall we? So this is the third sort of core feature that I wanted to raise with you in a snapshot of what is contemporary English. Now, if we followed prescriptive grammar rules, we would tag this with doesn't it? It makes you think though, doesn't it? Okay, so as we are all aware, you know, because we've been teaching this standard grammar for quite some years, standard English tags involve a whole rigmarole, really. Positive stem, negative tag, and vice versa. You repeat the auxiliary verb in the tag. Maybe you need to add do in tag. You've got irregular forms like shall we for a suggestion. There's also the part that's played by intonation. Is it a real question or a checking question? So all of this adds up to what we call a very heavy cognitive load and the manipulation of grammar in order to get the right tag. Now, many languages have a tag which is much less grammatically complex than English. Think how your mother tongue tags a question. You may well tag with the word no. You're Scottish, no? Rising intonation, okay? Or you might tag with just the word right at the end. You're Scottish, right? Okay. Both of these, so the no and the right, are modern replacements for all those complex tags, especially in spoken English. But what about this one? We've got in it here. Many people would argue that this is uncultivated, this is vulgar, this is uneducated. But is it? Well, this is an example of non-standard grammar. And while non-standard grammar may be viewed by some people as wrong or incorrect, David Crystal is very, very keen to point out to us that it is actually just the grammar of a particular variety of English. And a non-standard variety may be geographically based. You know, I use grammar that is Scottish and that my English friends have never uttered in their lives, but I'm still understandable to them. So it may be geographically based. It may be typical of a certain group in society, for example, young people or people from certain ethnicities. Now, in it has been described as the all-purpose question tag or the tag of the future. And this is an example of language as influenced by other varieties of English, in particular, something that we call MLE, Multicultural London English. Now, what is this? In Multicultural London English, in it is used as a tag in both statements and in questions. And Multicultural London English is defined as a way of speaking that is common among young people in London and the south of England. It's got elements in it of Caribbean, South Asian, African American English, as well as features of traditional London speech. So you have heard of Cockney, possibly, Cockney rhyming slang as a type, a very, very niche type of London English. Okay, so in it is already very, very common in Indian, Singaporean, and Malaysian English, and it may well become standard British English one day in it. All right, but it's something that we have to be aware of, that we are now talking about varieties of English or Englishes. Okay. All right, now here we go. This is the quotative like. All right, and it's so called because you are quoting what someone else has said, of course. It's not to be confused with like as a filler, because that is a whole other story. Now, I live with an 18-year-old. Well, to be fair, he's still 17, but he's going to be 18 in the next couple of weeks. And when he's with his friends and so on, I can honestly say I don't think I've ever heard Joshua use reported speech. Young people today, which makes me sound very old, but anyway, younger people today find other ways of reporting. So to give you examples, my son said to me the other day, my teacher was like, you've got exams, and we're like, so, or we all go, so. Now, some people hate quotative like, and they say it's nasty and it's lazy. But, to come back to David Crystal, he says, not everyone shares the gloom and despondency of those who see quotative forms as a sign of poor speech ability. He says it's an increase, a tiny one, but an increase nonetheless in the expressive richness of English. So exactly where and when quotative like, was born, it seems to be a little bit disputed. The usage, its birth isn't known, I think, for definitively, but it seems to be that it quickly spread, and it became a feature of something called Valley Speak or Val Speak, and was seen increasingly in the speech patterns of young women in California's San Fernando Valley. Now, the word like, it's although it's the word like that has attracted all the negative publicity, it's actually the be form that gives it the force of introducing a quotation, why it's called quotative like. So something that would normally be shown in writing with inverted commas and speech marks, it's actually the verb be that gives it this force, So in today's English, it's one of the hardest working functions of the verb to be. I'm like, and he's like, and we're like, and then direct speech. Okay. So if you're interested in any more of David Crystal talking about the life of B, there's a little blog link here. This is from Cambridge Dictionary, who tell us then that it's common in informal speaking to use like as a reporting verb, both for reporting what someone said or what someone thought. Used especially by young people. Okay, well, that's what Dictionary Cambridge says. However, although we do tend to associate it with younger people in an informal setting, actually, when you look at corpus analysis, linguists have found that quotative like is now alive and well and flourishing across a range of registers and dialects. And over the last 25 years, it has become English's most popular method of talking about talking. And it continues to spread across the globe. I even find myself using it nowadays rather than reported speech. I have to say that. Okay. So maybe that's the influence of living with a teen. Okay. So let's move on to this should be aspect number 5, not aspect number 6. All right. We literally exploded. Okay. So moving on to this last core theme in what constitutes contemporary English for me. As we mentioned earlier, this is an example of what we call repurposing, when an existing word takes on a new meaning or a new use. Now, literally used to only mean what I'm saying is true. If a word is translated literally, you take it at its most basic meaning. Nowadays, however, it's come to be used when we want to describe something in a rather dramatic or extreme way that cannot possibly be true. And some careful speakers, you might want to call them pedants, think that this is a mistake, and this is another example of bad or incorrect English. Now, going back to what we said, when we look at corpora and corpus analysis, results from the SBNC, the Spoken British National Corpus, tell us that literally is only used 38% of times with its original meaning nowadays. So that means 62% of usage is for emphatic use. So we can see then that there's been a huge explosion in the use of literally for dramatic emphasis. And it's very common indeed in the speech patterns of younger people who are literally falling over themselves to use it in nearly every utterance. So what could you do with your students, or what can we do with you just now? Old meaning or new meaning? All right, so you could certainly do something with your students where they sort of think a little bit about this. Is this literal meaning of literally, or is it the dramatic exaggeratedness of the literally for dramatic emphasis? Okay, so he literally flew across the room. Well, this is clearly this is new meaning for emphasis. We literally live just around the corner. Okay, this is old. It's a few hundred yards away. Literally hundreds of photos. This is old meaning. Literally over the moon. Okay, no, that's clearly new meaning. And tiramisu literally means pull me up. And that's going back to old meaning where you translate word for word. All right. But yes, it's very, very prevalent in the speech patterns of young people. Okay. All right. So if we come on to doing a little bit of a summary, and then I think we're going to open up for questions at the end. I think what I'd like to say in summary about this is what I've tried to show you then is that for me, at least, contemporary English is not just about vocabulary or new words and phrases. I think that's a very blinkered view of what contemporary English or any language, contemporary language is. It encompasses more than that. So whether language change and evolution comes from cross-cultural influences or from the innovation and creativity of youth language, or from regional variation within the domestic setting, language change is all around us today, and resistance to it has, of course, been going on for centuries. David Crystal makes the point that if the enemy is language change, it will pay us teachers to get to know it better. I do remember not that long ago doing a lesson on reported speech with sort of B2 plus level students, and somebody put their hand up at the end of the class and said, "But don't young people today just use like?" And I said, "Yes, they do. That is very true. However, in a Cambridge exam, where they are looking to see that you can manipulate the forms of standard grammar, you can't put like or quotative like in a written formal English language use of English part." Okay. All right. So I think what we must keep in mind then is how much language and the world around it are symbiotic. You know, you can't have one without the other. This is what David Crystal pointed out, you know, the different walks of life from which we get new language. If we are to prepare our learners for using English in the real world, it's our responsibility. It's incumbent upon us to draw students' attention to the fact that we do have something called spoken grammar and we have written grammar, and they're not the same. We need, especially in writing tasks, to focus on formality versus informality, on register and audience and appropriacy of language. It's highly likely that a lot of our students are very well versed in contemporary English, contemporary spoken English anyway, and they may well bring questions with them into the classroom. So even if we as teachers don't agree with some of the more on-trend uses of language, we have to keep abreast of linguistic change and development and evolution. So, I think the consensus is that while English is not invulnerable to other influences, the consensus is that English is going to be a dominant tongue for years to come. But we do have to remember that it may not be the English that we are currently familiar with. It's a different type of English. Everyone has ownership of English nowadays. And for this reason, change, be that grammatical or lexical and phonological, especially phonological, if you think now that non-native speakers of English outnumber native speakers by 5 to 1. So clearly the sound of English and the phonology is changing. Everyone has ownership of English nowadays. So change is inevitable. Grammar change, phonological change, and lexical change. Okay, so how can you keep up to date? Teachers on development courses usually ask me this, and I would always recommend you follow or take a look at the Cambridge World of Better Learning blog. Lots of great articles there on language, on pedagogy. There's an American linguist called Mignon Fogarty, or she calls herself Grammar Girl. She has a lot of good podcasts about language change. I always come back to Macmillan Dictionary. It's one of my absolute favorites. Keep up to date, with Word of the Week. They usually indicate something that's going on there, words from the news. It's lovely little sections on real vocabulary and real grammar, little video clips. And these are very useful to show students or direct students to. There's some great things on, the use of less versus fewer, for example. Urban Dictionary, be a bit careful, use judiciously. It's very slangy and it's very street, a lot of taboo language, but it's always worth having, as one of your go-to sites if a student asks you something that you're not sure about. And these are some of the handles that I follow on Twitter. Okay, so there are ways of keeping up to date for sure, for your learners and for you as a teacher. Okay, so that brings me to the end of my webinar, and in a little bit of conversion of usage, let's say cheers. Thank you very much for listening. And I think we can open up to questions now. I'm going to stop the share and see what happens.
Okay, yes, we can questions. We have some minutes. Yes, not many, but we have some minutes for questions.
Oh, so, hello. Right, we're back again. All right.
Are there any in the chat, Agus?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Many people are thanking, and I've copied some in this chat, some comments from before.
All right. Okay, Claire, it's been, I wouldn't say wonderful, It's been
Awesome. I think we have to say now to update. Yeah.
amazing.
Cool.
Splendid.
But you see, that sits very awkwardly with me because I'm 55 and I don't want to be going around saying awesome.
No way.
But you know, according to corpus linguistics, it's definitely overtaken some of the more sedate adjectives, right?
Right. Well, if there are no questions, Agus, we can close. Thank you very, very much, Claire. We heart you. We heart you.
I heart you. Thank you very much. Cheers. It's been a pleasure.
To all the people, all the audience, yes, who has accompanied us today. Hugs and kisses from Bahia Blanca, Argentina, because I haven't mentioned Argentina. So, well, see you soon. Yes.
See you soon. Thanks, everybody. All right.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.